Anthony Bourdain once said, if you've ever been to Cambodia, you will want to bash Henry Kissinger on the head. And after knowing what kinds of atrocities have been suffered by the people of Cambodia, I can totally agree with that statement. But just as much as I would like to bash Henry Kissinger on the head, after coming to the Khmer Rouge Memorial Museum, I want to bash Pol Pot on the head just as much, because Pol Pot himself is basically a predecessor to all the infiltrators into socialist movements, the antisocial scum who infiltrate socialist movements and use them for their own agenda. So here I am at the Cambodian Genocide Museum, and this is a very, very serious video, which is why it's, I'm not doing the usual introduction. This museum actually is located within a temple itself. So, it's within a Buddhist temple, and this is the very spot where Khmer Rouge guerrillas would carry out their activities. I don't even want to call them guerrillas, because it's kind of an embarrassment to call them guerrillas, because they're basically an embarrassment to the international socialist movement. But yeah, this is where that revisionist, the soldiers of that revisionist Pol Pot carried out their dastardly activities against the innocent people of Cambodia. Anyone they deemed to be a class enemy, including glasses wearers like myself. But anyway, this is going to be a very, very serious video with very, very upsetting themes. So if you don't want to watch it, you have been duly warned. So how could Pol Pot, an effete-looking intellectual, end up becoming a cult leader who could have millions of people killed and who could get people to do his dastardly deeds so willingly? Well, under all other circumstances, Pol Pot would have simply been some snotty bourgeois elite intelligentsia type of guy. You see, Pol Pot was one of the more privileged members of Cambodian society. In fact, his parents were so wealthy they could even send him to France, where he could actually join the French Communist Party. It was ironic that the man who so disdained glasses wearers and who degraded intellectuals as the scum of society who needed to be purged was himself a bourgeois intellectual who took advantage of the chaos that was inflicted on Cambodia in the tumultuous times of the Vietnam War. In fact, it was actually Henry Kissinger who was Pol Pot's greatest beneficiary, and it was Henry Kissinger to whom Pol Pot owed the pleasure of his success, for it was Henry Kissinger who created the material conditions necessary for Pol Pot to rise. Throughout the late 60s and early 70s, the United States dropped at least 26 million explosive submunitions on Cambodia during the Vietnam War in order to carpet bomb the place, in order to basically kill everything in sight. But that basically radicalized the people by destroying their homes, destroying their communities, and destroying their very raison d'être, their very reason for existence. And so, just like, Hamas took advantage of the people of Gaza's suffering in order to recruit soldiers. That's why I always say that Israel is the greatest recruiter for Hamas. Pol Pot took advantage of the innocent people of Cambodia's material conditions in order to radicalize them and thus recruit soldiers for his army. And these desperate young people who had lost everything and who regarded basically Pol Pot as their savior, because, when you're in such dire straits, you see anyone who appears to be on your side as some kind of a hero. Well, before long, Pol Pot had himself an army. But now Pol Pot was faced with the task of justifying the existence of this army. He had to provide a reason for them to follow him, so he needed to blame someone. Well, obviously he couldn't blame Henry Kissinger because these people didn't know who Henry Kissinger was. They were just too far away, too far removed from the United States for Henry Kissinger to be a viable person to blame for their material conditions. But, well, considering that Cambodia at the time was still a largely agrarian society with a very, very small white-collar base, well, Pol Pot, being the classical demagogue he was, had the perfect solution. Blame the glasses wearers like Comrade Confucian for the suffering of the Cambodian people, very much like how the patriotic National Socialists of America like to blame the LGBT community for the suffering of the global South or for the suffering of poor white-collar working-class Americans. They like to blame woke people. Pol Pot blamed the suffering and poverty of the Cambodian people on the glasses wearers and on the white-collar people living in the cities. And basically, his solution, in order to solve the problem of Cambodia's conditions, was to forcefully relocate everyone into the countryside and basically turn everyone into the same, a farmer, basically. So in order to make everyone uniform, Pol Pot basically forced everyone to conform to a very, very strict mold. Everybody had to wear a black uniform with a red scarf, and everything deemed to be foreign, for example, Western clothing or watches, which is ironic because communism is itself a Western ideology, and everything that was considered to be bourgeois degeneracy, such as revealing clothing or, anything that came from the West, such as Western watches or Western shoes, were deemed to be reactionary. And if you did not obey Pol Pot's rules, well, the consequences were dire. It's true that Marxists get very, very defensive whenever you bring up Pol Pot, and they insist that Pol Pot was no communist, that he was a fanatic, a fascist, and basically a reactionary in socialist garb. And while all of these are true, the same could also be said of China's Deng Xiaoping, who supported Pol Pot. Just like how Midwestern Marx, the American National Socialist Organization, is supporting all these antisocial reactionary elements while going around bullying other people who disagree with them. Deng Xiaoping saw an alliance with Pol Pot as a great way in order to weaken the influence of Vietnam and to strengthen his own position in the region. Well, to be fair, Deng Xiaoping was also holding hands and making friends with soft-core Southeast Asian dictators like Lee Kuan Yew. Of course, Lee Kuan Yew was a baby when you compare him to Pol Pot, as well as the reactionary Malaysian government. So I also have doubts about whether Deng Xiaoping can truly be considered a friend of the Internationale, because Deng Xiaoping himself was a very pragmatic man, a man who was willing to do deals with the devil in order to advance the interests of his own country, which is why it's no surprise that Maoists actually hate Deng Xiaoping, and that's why people in the socialist movement should also, at the very least, assess Deng Xiaoping critically, instead of seeing him as some kind of a revolutionary hero. He was not. He was indeed a very good friend and comrade of Pol Pot. These are some of the weapons that we used to murder anyone that Pol Pot considered to be a class enemy. And I would assume these are the manacles that were used to keep these people in the dungeons. So, this is what happens when opportunists like Pol Pot, who don't actually believe in socialism, take over. And do you see why? Why we're always gatekeeping from antisocial elements? This is the reason why. Now this is the killing well that was used by that fake socialist Pol Pot in order to dispose of the bodies of his victims. Now let's read what it says. Khmer Rouge regime killing well. A well was used by villagers to get water for their daily water usage, but during the Khmer Rouge regime, the killers executed victims and dropped them into this very well. It's quite deep. The victims were handcuffed by the Khmer Rouge cadres. The executioners used axes, hoes, wooden bars, sharp iron blades to whack the victims and drop them into the well. In 1986, the Siem Reap 100 Rescue Children team from orphanage organization collected bones, skulls, and skeletons that scattered in the 2-floor rundown building. The 100 Rescue Children team excavated and found 50 to 60 bodies from the well. Goodness gracious me. It's very well. The bones and bone fragments scattered around in this killing site. This mass grave recently has been excavated, and it was found that there were more than 23 bodies. Some of them were children. The victims were beheaded, hacked and whacked with iron bars, machetes, axes, and hoes by the Khmer Rouge regime executioners. Jesus Christ. Horrifying. No wonder reactionaries love Pol Pot, because he's basically the number one way for them to justify how barbarous socialism is supposed to be. They love bringing up Pol Pot. Well, these were the communal pots and pans that the Khmer Rouge used for their cooking. As you can see, they didn't even use modern cooking utensils because Pol Pot was fundamentally a reactionary. It's funny because people would often say that Pol Pot is a representative of what true communism is or true socialism, but Pol Pot Pol Pot was trying to push society backwards by rejecting modern technology, and he was basically trying to revive some insane nationalistic fervor. Now, it's true that Pol Pot was a Marxist-Leninist, but he also was a dogmatic idealist. He was indeed very, very proud of his ancient Khmer heritage, and I think that most people would indeed be proud of such architectural marvels, such as the temples of Angkor, and he really considered the Khmer people to be, well, not only a great civilization, but a superior race as well. He considered them to be the Aryans of Southeast Asia, so to speak, due to their magnificent ancient cultural heritage. And so he wasn't a big fan of Vietnamese people either. And that's why he was sort of like basically a national socialist. In fact, I will even say that Pol Pot was kind of like a Hindutva guy on steroids, or a Zionist on steroids, so to speak, because these people fundamentally, they call themselves socialists, but rather Pol Pot was more of a national socialist in a sense, because he did not like the idea of modern technology, and he wanted to push the Khmer people back to some halcyon age in his mind, some golden age, some imaginary golden age in his mind of the past. So it shows you that Pol Pot himself was not a historical materialist. His pattern of behavior, Pol Pot's pattern of behavior is very much like a very, very reactionary kind of nationalist who is fanatically zealous about ensuring some pure kind of state, in a sense. You know, Pol Pot didn't only dislike glasses wearers like me, he disliked anyone deemed a threat to his regime. He also didn't like Vietnamese people very much. So if you want to talk about how the people of how Pol Pot is a representation of true socialism, then we can also say that, you know, it was the Vietnamese who overthrew Pol Pot and liberated the Cambodian people from his clutches. It wasn't the Americans, that's for sure. And that's a good reason why. These are the unidentified skull and bone fragments of Pol Pot's victims. You know, Pol Pot's probably the most convenient bludgeon that all these reactionaries use in order to basically demonize all of us socialists as if we were, you know, bloodthirsty monsters. But considering that he himself was a plant, he was an establishment plant, you know, that's why I keep saying that the left needs to be gatekept. Do you see now why I keep saying we need to gatekeep the left from antisocial elements? This is your answer. So I hope this visit to the Genocide Museum, and believe me, it was one of the most upsetting parts of this trip, I hope this visit makes it very clear and it drives home the point that we need to guard the left. Guard it from infiltration by antisocial elements. The left must be guarded and gatekept because there are always opportunists who are going to use the mantle of socialism or use the mantle of communism, but are going to use it for nefarious purposes. But don't worry, I have a much more uplifting and exciting video coming up for you guys. I put the dreary stuff up first so that, you know, I can sort of like uplift you with the next video. But this was a very important video that I had to make, and it wasn't fun going to this museum. It was a very, very depressing part of my trip, but I had to. Okay, so the left must always be guarded and gatekept, and we must never let any antisocial elements come in and pervert our movements for their own nefarious agenda. Thank you. See you soon.